Hi, welcome back, and today we're going to be looking at Act 5, Scene 3. I'd like you to read this slide and the next slide before we get to the actual text, and you can annotate as we go. Okay, Act 5, Scene 3 opens inside Macbeth's castle at Dunsinane. So enter Macbeth, the doctor, and attendants. So compare this to the number of people on stage in the last scene. So Macbeth is surrounded by old and kind of weaker people, women, and doctors, certainly not soldiers like the ones that we saw last time. So we really see how weak he is. So Macbeth says, "Bring me no more reports. Let them fly all, till Birnam Wood remove to Dunsinane. I cannot taint with fear. What's the boy, Malcolm? Was he not born of woman? The spirits that know all mortal consequences have pronounced me thus. Fear not, Macbeth. No man that's born of woman shall e'er have the power upon thee. Then fly, false thanes, and mingle with the English epicures. That mind I sway by, and the heart I bear shall never sag with doubt nor shake with fear." So at this opening with Macbeth, I want you to just kind of note Macbeth's frustration. He's tired of being told that all of his thanes are deserting him. And he holds on to the belief in the witch's prophecy. He says, "Let them fly. I cannot taint with fear." He says, "What's the boy, Malcolm?" He's kind of insulting Malcolm here. So Malcolm isn't as young as Fleance or young Macduff, but according to Hollingshead, he's too young to be able to take charge of being king himself. But Shakespeare uses it here as like an insult, suggesting he's not yet a man, he's just a boy. All mortal consequences references the kind of destinies and the fates. Here it says, "Fear not." So here we can see that Macbeth no longer wants to change fate. He's now fully trusting in the prophecies to keep him safe. The reference to English epicures is that the Scottish used to dislike the English, that the Scottish saw themselves as being haughty, as being very hard men of the land, and they saw the kind of English as being soft, as being quite luxurious, as being quite weak. So that's that idea of epicures, liking the finer things in life. And the mind I sway by. So the mind in this case is kind of used like determination, like my mind is made up, it won't change. At that point, a servant enters, and Macbeth says, "The devil damn thee black, thou cream-faced loon. Where goest thou, that goose look?" So here, cream-faced loon, cream is very pale. It's the color of milk. So again, we see the connotations of paleness and whiteness being weak, white being the color of surrender. And a loon, characteristically, it's a kind of Scottish term of abuse for someone who's ignorant and worthless. The idea of a goose look, again, a goose was being used as an insult. It's suggesting that he's silly, or that there's some kind of wild goose chase. It's a hopeless waste of time to look that way. The servant says, "There is 10,000. Geese, villain? Soldiers, sir. Go prick thy face and overred thy fear, thou lily-livered boy. What soldiers, Patch? Death of thy soul, those linen cheeks of thine are counsellors to fear. What soldiers, Whey-face?" So again, we see the servant has gone white with fear. So the liver was thought to be the seat of passion, and a bloodless liver made you white, gave you a very pale complexion. So he's saying he's white as a lily. And this idea of pricking thy face means kind of squeeze your cheeks to kind of put blood back into your face and cover up the fact that you're scared, because to be scared and a man was to be weak. The servant says, "The English force so please you. Take thy face hence. Seaton!" And then he says to aside, I am sick at heart when I behold Seaton, I say, this push will cheer me ever or deceit me now. So this, I just want to pick up on the word, on the name Seaton. Some people say it's pronounced Satan, in which case there would be the obvious connotations of the devil and the devil working for Macbeth. But I've done a bit of research, and although it makes sense to say Satan, it's in some ways is contradictory, because Seaton doesn't actually do anything bad. He doesn't encourage Macbeth in any way. And there was a real Scottish family at the time of Macbeth, and the time that Shakespeare's writing. And Seaton was a family name. They were the Seatons of Touch, which is a place in Scotland, or it might be called Tewk. They were supporters of the Jacobites, so King James's son, Charles I, was executed in 1649, and there was no English king until 1660 with Charles II, when he restored the throne. But he goes back to Tewk in the 15th century, so there's this powerful Scottish family, and James VI granted the office of armour bearer to Sir Alexander Seaton. So anyway, you don't need to know that in that much detail. It's just a bit of interesting information that I think it is pronounced Seaton, and that is Shakespeare acknowledging the family, the Seaton family, who was a prominent Scottish family and who James had granted office of armour bearer. And it makes sense because he does go on to ask him to put on his armour. Macbeth says, I have lived long enough, my way of life is fallen into the sere, the yellow leaf, and that which should accompany old age as honour, love, obedience, troops of friends, I must not look to have, but, in their stead, curses, not loud but deep, mouth honour, breath, which poor heart would fain deny, and dare not. Seaton! So, just looking at that, you see there, I've lived long enough. Macbeth's life is joyless and it's tiresome, and it has a very defeated kind of nihilistic tone. Nihilism meaning that Macbeth can't see any sense, can't see any meaning left in life. Is falling into the sere means it's dry and withered, the yellow leaf. So if we talk about the seasons and how each represents life, spring meaning the new life, the hope, summer being the best times of your life, autumn is when you start to decline into old age, and then winter obviously is death. So the yellow leaf represents that idea of autumn, so kind of that going into old age. And here he lists all the things that he should have in his old age, but he doesn't. Instead, he has curses, not loud but deep. And there's this kind of deep kind of felt hatred towards him by those he has wronged, which essentially is all of Scotland, which is emphasized by that word deep. A mouth honour, meaning he realizes that people are just paying him lip service. They tell him what he wants to hear because they're too scared to tell him otherwise. Breath, he can still breathe, but the kind of miserable hearts of Macbeth's followers would very much like to withhold breath from him. At this point, Seaton walks in. What's your gracious pleasure? What news more? So here a kind of sense of panic, very short lines by Macbeth here. All is confirmed, my lord, which was reported. I'll fight till my bones my flesh be hacked. Give me my armour. So here we as an audience are reminded of Macbeth, the war hero. It reminds the audience of the brave fighting soldier that Macbeth once was at the beginning of the play. And we see this very graphic language being used, which is very similar to the language that was used in Act 1, Scene 2, when we're told that Macbeth unseamed someone from the knave to the chaps. So here that idea of bones being having the flesh hacked off them. So it's important that we are reminded of Macbeth and how he was at the beginning, because that suits with that genre convention of the tragedy. as an audience, we must still like and respect the hero before his ultimate downfall and death at the end. Seaton says, "'Tis not needed yet." Armour back in those days was very heavy. The battle hadn't really yet begun. So Seaton's saying, you don't need your armour yet. And Macbeth says, "I'll put it on. Send out more horses. Scur the country round. Hang those that talk of fear. Give me mine armour." So scur just means gallop. So send out people all around the country, gather more troops, hang those that talk of fear. So here we can really see how tyrannical he is. Lots of imperatives. So send out, give me. So you can see Macbeth is going to desperately trying to hang on to his control. So Seaton goes to fetch his armour, and at that point the doctor comes in, and Macbeth says to him, "How does your patient, doctor?" Here he refers to Lady Macbeth as your patient, whereas before it was always my wife. So again, I think that really shows the emotional distance that's developed between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. The doctor says, "Not so sick, my lord, as she is troubled with thick-coming fancies that keep her from rest." So this thick-coming fancies is a kind of euphemism. He doesn't want to say memories of murders, a kind of these frequent delusions that she has, because he knows that that will risk him being killed. So Macbeth says, "Cure her of that." And that imperative shows that he really doesn't understand the nature of her illness, or that maybe he's just in denial. "Canst thou not minister to a mind disease, pluck from the memory of rooted sorrow, raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with some sweet oblivious antidote cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart?" So if we have a look at these verbs, minister, pluck, raise, cleanse, these ideas that Macbeth is saying, you should be, as a human, as a man, be able to fix these problems. But essentially, these are supernatural. These are moral problems. These are things that only God can fix. And it really shows that Macbeth is, after all, just a man. There are things that he cannot do. And one of the things that he cannot do is decide who will be king. And I really think that there is irony in this, where Lady Macbeth says, "A little water cures us of this deed," back in Act 2, Scene 2. And here we see that there is no cure. The only cure is from God. So there is that little bit of irony in there. So the doctor said, "Therein the patient must minister to himself." So minister here has two meanings: to self-administer, but also suggests the need of a spiritual absolution. It must come from a church minister. Seaton returns with the armour, and attendant prepares to equip Macbeth with it. "Throw physic to the dog, I'll none of it." So here he's saying throw medicine to the dog. So he's kind of writing off the doctors. He will take action himself. "Come, put mine armour on, give me my staff. Seaton, send out." So a staff is like a baton that he would be arming himself to go into war. "Doctor, the thanes fly from me. Come, sir, dispatch," meaning move quickly. Here you can see he's talking to Seaton, and then he's talking to the doctor. He's changing who he's talking to, and that's indicated by those dashes. "If thou could, doctor, cast the water of my land, find her disease, and purge it to a sound and pristine health, I would applaud thee to the very echo that should applaud again." So here he's talking about if you could cast, meaning if you could analyze the water of my land. Here he's talking about analyzing the urine of the land, so personifying Scotland as being an illness and analyzing that illness from looking at the urine. So the idea of finding her disease and then purging it means to get rid of. Here he's talking about the English invaders, which is ironic because actually he is the disease. So he says, "Pull it off, I say." So there again he's talking to Seaton and the armour, and then back to the doctor. "What rhubarb, senna, Or what purgative drug would scour these English hence? Hear'st thou of them? So rhubarb and senna were both used as laxatives. So again, that idea of purging. The doctor says, "Ay, my good lord, your royal preparation makes us hear something." So the doctor saying, yes, I have heard that the English are coming. Macbeth then says to Seaton, "Bring it after me." He's talking about his armour. "I will not be afraid of death and bane till Burnham Forest come to Dunsinane." So here we see his total confidence in the witch's prophecy that we heard in Act 4, Scene 1. And aside, the doctor says right at the end, "Were I from Dunsinane away and clear, profit again should hardly draw me here." So the doctor wouldn't stay in Macbeth's castle for a large sum of money. Here, I mean, it just goes to show that everyone's abandoning Macbeth. He can't even buy loyalty anymore.
So I just want you to have a think about Macbeth's language and notice how he kind of dominates that scene. He uses loads of imperatives. He's giving lots of commands. So what I would like you to do is make a list of all the demands that he makes from the start of the scene. And I'd like you to write a paragraph on Macbeth's language and what it suggests about his state of mind in that scene.
So in terms of Macbeth's language, Macbeth's tone in this act is typically very brazen and bold. It's typical of the Macbeth we see later in this play. The reports he has heard can have no consequence given the prophecies of the apparitions from Act 4, Scene 1. And throughout this scene, any doubts he may have are quelled by his confident imperatives. Bring me no reports, fly false thanes, and a lot more, which I hope he found. We see a man who's completely self-assured. He is a confident tyrant, as Seward calls him in the subsequent scene. These angry words do a lot to assert his own manhood, and they are very much in contrast to the cowardice that he perceives in others, not only his servant, who he calls a cream-faced and lily-livered boy, but also the rebel soldiers, whom he insultingly refers to as epicures, calling them self-indulgent and lazy. So in the dialogue, we see the servant, and Macbeth orders him to prick his cheeks in order to put colour back in his face. And it's a kind of ironic reminder of the earlier colour symbolism, when Macbeth was accused by his wife of having a heart so white, as opposed to her hands, which were red and the colour of his. So another imperative he uses is "give me my armour," and it has to be repeated when Seaton initially refuses to do so. So similarly, when the doctor confesses he's been unable to cure Lady Macbeth's madness, Macbeth mocks his ability and kind of challenges him to throw physic to the dogs. So we see Macbeth desperately trying to reassert his manhood and keep control of the situation.